Good morning, everyone. This is Mrs. Bollinger. I am here talking to you today about the Ku Klux Klan. So, unfortunate part of our history that we have to learn about these terrible crimes that were committed after the Civil War by the Ku Klux Klan and the terrible things that they did. But it's not something I want to gloss over. I want you to understand how terrible and bad they were and understand three main goals here. This is what you need to get out of this lesson. You need to be able to answer who were they. You need to be able to answer what were their goals, and also how did they accomplish those goals. So those are the three main focuses. If you could go ahead and open up your assignment where you have your 10 questions about the KKK. And as you're watching this video, just pause it and answer the questions as we go. That's why I don't have it open full screen right now is because I've got the questions open on my screen too. So as I'm talking, I can make sure I answer them all. All right, so first off, what is the Ku Klux Klan? The Ku Klux Klan was created after the end of the Civil War when Reconstruction started, and they were a group of white men. It was specifically the male race. They did not let females into the Klan. White men that wanted to promote that the white race was the best race in America. And they would do anything to put down African Americans and any other minority group as well. They were started in 1865, so that's the year they were founded. The end of the Civil War also was 1865, so you can kind of see that the end of the Civil War started breeding this Klan because they thought, okay, well, now that they are changing slavery, slavery is not going to be around anymore. We're going to have to find another way to put down African Americans, and that's when they started the Ku Klux Klan. The Ku Klux Klan was definitely for the Democratic Party. They were all Democrats, and they were against the Republican Party. The Republican Party was the party of Lincoln, the party of anti-slavery. So they were against the Republicans all the way. And remember in our last lesson, we talked about the radical Republicans and how they wanted to give equal rights to African Americans. So the Klan definitely did not agree with that at all. And were pretty much against any Republican, especially Republicans in the South. Now, the Klan did mostly stay in the southern states. Anywhere there was slavery, the Klan became pretty popular after Reconstruction. Although they do have some instances of the Klan in the North too, it definitely wasn't as prevalent. So some of the things that the KKK did, and not all the questions might be in order, so make sure you're scanning your questions as you go through. The Klansmen would dress up in white robes. Now you see this guy here has a red robe on. Usually that means that he was like the Grand Master or like the leader of the Klan. You'll also see a few other pictures from when the Klan started where they maybe not be wearing white. And that's because there was no uniformity in the beginning. People just kind of dressed up and covered their face and wore whatever. But as the Klan went on, white became their color. And you can see how they would cover their face and they would just have the eye holes and stuff. And it kind of showed that they were not willing to give up their identity. This is a picture of some Klansmen in Mississippi. This was back when the Klan just started. Obviously, they're not wearing white. This is an artist drawing of it. And this is Mississippi Ku Klux Klan in the disguises in which they were captured. And somebody took a photograph and then drew it. So you can kind of see there was a little bit of changing here and there, but they definitely disguised themselves whenever they were meeting together, and then also whenever they were committing the terrorist acts that they did. So one of the main ways that they intimidated people were to write threatening letters. They would find people that were either Republicans, white Republicans. They also targeted scalawags and the carpetbaggers that were trying to help African Americans. If you see back in this picture back here with it's a cross that's burning, that was kind of like their like their main signal that they didn't like what you were doing. So in the middle of the night, they would come and they'd put a white cross in your yard, and they would burn it. And that was kind of like a warning to stay away, to stop doing what you're doing. They would intimidate the teachers that came down to try to teach the African Americans and try to send them back to the north. They would intimidate, any of the Black voters, the people that were trying to vote, all the way up to what they called lynching. Lynching is where you hang someone from a tree. And the lynching in the South was pretty terrible at this time. The KKK did not want the African Americans voting at all. So any African Americans that were trying to vote or getting out to try and get other people to vote often were intimidated with these measures, and had their crosses burning in their yard, or they were beat up, or they were lynched, or threatened in many different ways. So dressing up was one way to intimidate, so you didn't know who your attacker was. But then they also, threatened people, they beat people, and they also lynched people as well. So their main goals were to make sure that the white race was superior to everyone else. They didn't want any minorities in the country to vote. They didn't want them to take office, political office or anything like that. So they wanted the white race to remain superior. The KKK is Ku Klux Klan. It started off a Greek word called kiklos. Kiklos is, I think, how you pronounce it. And kiklos means circle. So it basically means a circle clan, trying to show that the circle was united, I guess. And they wore masks to keep their identity unknown. Now, I say that, but a lot of these towns in the South, remember, are very rural, very small. So even though they did wear masks, a lot of times people knew each other by their voices and stuff too. So they weren't always completely not known, I guess. They just thought they were, being kind of sly wearing the masks, I guess. All right, moving on. Here's another picture of the burning cross. They did a lot of these at their KKK meetings as well. These pictures are from later on, and I'll talk about that in a second. But the focus we're focusing on is right after the Civil War. So why did most Klansmen not get punished for their crimes? Well, the big reason is because most of the law enforcement at the time were white, and most of the law enforcement were also in the KKK. So if a KKK member committed a crime like lynching or beating someone up, the law enforcement would just turn a blind eye and say, oh, we don't know who did it, or, there's no proof, that kind of stuff. And so they would not prosecute any of the Klansmen because of that. And even the court system, even if you got past the police officers and went to the court system, a lot of the lawyers and judges were also KKK members. So the legal system worked against African Americans at that time too, because they were run by white people. All right, so the national government, remember, these are mostly in the South, so the national government controls all the states, and they did try to help. They did pass a couple of laws against the KKK to make their crimes federal crimes instead of state crimes. So when they did that, that was towards the 1870s. So this was, after 4 or 5 years of the KKK being around and committing these atrocities. But it was hard to enforce. because of the local law enforcement not agreeing with the national government. So they did try to help, definitely, but it didn't completely work for the African Americans in the South. The KKK membership did die down for the first time in the end of Reconstruction. So when Reconstruction ended in the 1870s, the Klan kind of went away. They disappeared for a while. Basically, the Klan thought, well, we got our goals met. You know, we got the Democrats out of the South. They left, the military left. All of the southern states are now back in the Union. And so they basically said, well, we don't really need to meet anymore. So that was in the 1870s. There was two other times that the KKK came back. The first was in 1915, and that was to target a lot of the immigrants that were coming into the country at the time. Because remember, they're not just against African Americans; they were against all minorities, and they didn't like the immigrants coming in and taking their jobs and stuff. So in 1915, it was mostly about immigration. And then again in the 1940s, we have another insurgence or resurgence of the KKK. And this time it was focused on the civil rights movement, the Martin Luther King Jr. and all of that. So there was that time period at the end, or like the 40s, 50s, and 60s, that the KKK came back together. And these pictures that, these two pictures are from that time period. I couldn't find too many from the Reconstruction time period, but the goals were the same. Their meetings were similar. You know, what they did, what in intimidation was very similar in the 1940s as the 1870s, pretty much the same. I do want to tell you a quick story about a KKK event that happened in Mims, Florida. If you go to Mims, there's a house there that they have the KKK members actually blew up, and we had two people die. It was Harry and Harriet Moore. They actually were members of the actually, I'm not sure what political party they were, but they were trying to get African Americans to vote during the 1950s and 1960s. And they were going around and trying to register African Americans to vote. And the KKK didn't like that. And they tried intimidation, but that didn't work. And so they actually blew up their house in Mims and killed both of them on Christmas Day, nonetheless. If you ever go up to Mims, there's actually a kind of like a museum to honor them and their memory and what they were trying to do, which is pretty amazing. Very brave people for sure. So we even have a local connection of things that happened with the KKK. Florida was definitely not immune to this. KKK was very popular in Florida during these time periods. So not a good time in our history, not a good organization whatsoever. Obviously very racist, but it's something you need to understand what they did to African Americans and what African Americans had to live through during this time period as well. All right, I hope you got all the questions answered. And if you need to rewatch the video or ask me any questions, please go right ahead. Thank you so much for working hard for me, and I will talk to you again soon. Thanks.